When my husband passed away, he left me an 80 million inheritance, and I kept it secret for a reason. Days later, I asked my daughter, in law for just 10. What she said shattered me. In that moment, I realized who she truly was, and I answered with 3 words she would never forget. The day Lionel died was the day I realized how much the world expects from a widow. It was a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of morning where the sun rises politely, the birds chirp as though nothing has happened, and yet everything in your life has shifted irrevocably. I found him lying in bed beside me, his chest still, his hands cold, and for a moment I thought it was a dream, one of those nightmares where reality folds, and you cannot wake up. But it wasn't, it was real. Lionel Morrison, my husband, my partner of 42 years, had left this world quietly, gracefully, leaving me behind to navigate the chaos he'd left in his absence. And yet, as I held his hand for the last time, I didn't cry. Not yet. There was something heavier than grief pressing down on me, the awareness of what Lionel and I had built together, quietly, carefully, and the knowledge that no one, absolutely no one, understood the truth of it. In the weeks that followed, everyone emerged from the shadows. My son David called first, repeatedly, feigning concern. "Are you eating, Mom? Are you sleeping?" His voice was thick with a protective sort of worry, the kind that sounds real but carries an unspoken question: what about the money? His wife, Jessica, arrived next, like a storm in heels, carrying casseroles I had no desire to eat and asking questions I had no intention of answering. "Have you considered downsizing?" she asked on day 3. On day 5, she suggested assisted living, citing my needs, in a tone that barely hid her calculation. I nodded, smiled, and said nothing. Let them underestimate me, that was part of the plan. Everyone assumed widows are fragile, that grief turns intelligence into fumbling, that sorrow is a weakness to exploit. They were wrong. I knew better. Lionel had taught me better. At the funeral, their eyes never left me. They watched how I handled the eulogies, how I clutched the program with my trembling hands, how I smiled politely at distant cousins and friends. Everyone knew Lionel had been successful. No one knew how successful. And yet, they assumed I was naive, that grief had rendered me incapable of rational thought, that I was now vulnerable and waiting for them to swoop in. I let them believe it. Quietly, I counted the moments, noting every glance, every sideways smile, every subtle measure of control they tried to assert. It was all very human, predictable, expected. When the lawyer finally called me in to read the will, I went alone. No one else needed to witness the moment, and in truth, I didn't want anyone to. Lionel and I had planned everything meticulously, deliberately. We had learned long ago that money changes people, especially family. Lionel had always said, "Let them see who they really are, Viola. Don't hand it to them before you know." So we agreed never speak numbers, and never reveal the truth until it was absolutely necessary. And now, sitting in the quiet office, I understood the gravity of that agreement. The document was precise, almost surgical in its clarity. Investment accounts, properties, cash reserves, everything we had built, preserved, and grown. At the bottom, the final number stared back at me like a bright, cold beacon: 8th, 247 Thauhogen. I laughed, an unrestrained, almost hysterical laugh that startled the lawyer. He expected tears. I didn't cry. I felt clarity. I felt power. I felt a strange, pure exhilaration. I had the means to live exactly as I wanted, with no interference, no judgment, no manipulation. When I returned home, David called as if nothing had changed. I told him only the bare minimum. "Your father ensured I'm taken care of?" I said. "I'll be cautious, of course. Fixed income now." Jessica exhaled audibly on the other end, relief poorly concealed. They believed I was dependent, that I needed guidance, that my decisions were fragile. They didn't see a widow, they saw a mark. An opportunity. And I understood fully. If they discovered the truth, if they realized the extent of what Lionel left me, their concern would shift instantly from help to control. They would not help me. They would try to own me. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The safe was open, the documents spread like a treasure map before me. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of reality settle. $8,247,000. Lionel had given me financial freedom. He had given me safety. He had given me the rarest gift of all, the ability to see people clearly and choose who belonged in my life. I closed the safe carefully, turned off the light, and made a decision I would never regret. I would tell no one. Not yet, not until I knew exactly who deserved to see the truth. The days after Lionel's funeral settled into a strange rhythm. Half silence, half whispers of expectation. My house, once a quiet haven for two, now felt like a stage where every move I made was being watched, judged, evaluated. David called daily, sometimes twice, and Jessica's messages were almost constant. Texts, emails, even pictures of meals she thought I might like. Each time, I smiled politely, pretending to consider their advice, while inside I marveled at their audacity. They assumed my grief would make me pliable. They assumed my sorrow would blind me to their true intentions. They assumed wrong. I began keeping a private journal that week, writing down every interaction, every suggestion, every thinly veiled attempt to manipulate. David suggests assisted living. I wrote, Jessica offers to help manage finances. Both act concerned, neither is. Both seek control, must remain vigilant. Writing helped me untangle the complex web of expectation and deception, helped me see clearly what Lionel had warned me about all those years. Money is not just currency. It is power, a magnifying glass for human character. Some people grow generous, others reveal their hunger. My family's true selves were now on display, and I had a front row seat. Friday arrived with a crisp breeze and a low sun that cast long shadows across the driveway. I was putting finishing touches on the new living room, adjusting the placement of framed artwork and polishing the dark oak floors, when a familiar engine rolled up outside. I peeked through the curtains and froze. David's BMW. My chest tightened. He didn't know, of course. He had no idea about the inheritance, not yet. His surprise, his expectation of control, would be delicious when the truth emerged. I straightened my cream silk blouse, smoothed my tailored slacks, and opened the door with a calm I did not feel entirely. Hello, David. Come in, I said. He stepped inside slowly, as if walking into a museum. His eyes widened at the marble floors, the sweeping staircase, the crystal chandelier catching the sunlight. Mum. His voice trembled slightly, disbelief breaking through the practiced calm of the last weeks. I smiled faintly. Coffee, I asked, guiding him to the kitchen. The countertops gleamed under the recessed lights, the appliances pristine, the breakfast nook overlooking the manicured backyard where the autumn leaves were just beginning to fall. He followed, still silent, still assessing, and I poured coffee into delicate porcelain cups, placing one before him with a measured hand. He sat, hands clasped, eyes darting, a man suddenly unsure of his footing in the house he had believed I could no longer navigate alone. Mom, how? He finally asked, voice low, almost reverent. How did you afford all this? I took a deliberate sip of my own coffee, letting the moment stretch, savoring his disbelief. Your father was a wise man, David. He invested carefully, conservatively, over decades. Every decision measured, every dollar accounted for. He went pale. How much? He asked, almost a whisper. I set my cup down, looked him in the eyes, and for the first time in years, saw the boy I had raised. The one who had made me Mother's Day cards, who had crawled into my lap during nightmares, who had once believed the world was simple and kind gone. Replaced by the man shaped by a wife whose hunger for control he could not yet see. "'Nough, David," I said. "'Nough that I will never need anything from anyone again." He ran his hands through his hair, trying to process, trying to reconcile the mother he thought she knew with the woman sitting composed before him. "But you asked Jessica for $10. You seemed struggling," he stammered. I smiled, a sharp, quiet smile. I asked to see who she really was. That $10 revealed everything I needed to know. Kindness, she had none. Respect, she had none. Humanity, not a trace. He recoiled slightly, and I saw a flicker of realization. The truth that wealth is not only about money, but about the clarity it brings in seeing people for who they truly are. David's mouth opened, closed, searched for words. "We were trying to help," he said finally, voice shaky. "We wanted to protect you, to take care of you." I shook my head. "No, David. You wanted control. That is the difference." Silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a gardener trimming hedges. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting golden streaks across the polished surfaces, highlighting the weight of my words. "Your father left me $8 million, I said quietly, letting it land. The coffee cup in his hands trembled, cracked slightly, spilling a few drops onto the marble. He didn't seem to notice. $8 million, I repeated. 8.2, actually. David's face drained of color. "Oh my God," he whispered. 8 million. I folded my hands, calm, resolute. "Yes, David, and now, we know who we are dealing with." His phone buzzed. Jessica. He glanced, but I only smiled. I didn't need to answer. He knew the truth, and that truth would change everything. For the first time, I felt the intoxicating clarity of freedom. Not reckless freedom, but deliberate, controlled, perfectly earned freedom. David stood frozen for a long moment, staring at me as if the words I had spoken were both a revelation and a condemnation. I could feel his mind racing, trying to calculate, to justify, to reason a way out, but the truth I had revealed could not be undone. For years he had assumed he knew my limits, my struggles, my vulnerabilities. He had built a narrative of a helpless mother, a widow who needed guidance, who needed protection. And now that narrative had crumbled. I was no longer the woman he thought he could control, and the realization unsettled him deeply. He finally spoke, his voice low and careful, almost pleading. "Mom, why didn't you tell us before? Why all the secrecy?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms lightly. "Lionel warned me, David. He said money changes people, brings out the worst. He wanted me to see who would love me for me, and who would love only what they could take from me. And now I know." He looked away, his jaw tight, hands shaking slightly. I could see the conflict between his love for me and his loyalty to Jessica, between the son he wanted to be and the man she had molded him into. We thought we were helping," he said, almost as if rehearsing a mantra. "We only wanted to ensure you were safe, to protect you from mistakes." I shook my head slowly, letting my words fall like a chisel, carving away his assumptions. "David, this isn't about protection. This is about control. You wanted access to my finances, my home, my life, all because you assumed I couldn't manage them myself. And you tried to use the law, a conservatorship, to make it happen." He swallowed hard, his face pale. The truth was undeniable, and he knew it. He finally asked, in a voice that betrayed the first trace of genuine fear, "What happens now?" I tilted my head, studying him carefully, feeling a strange mixture of sorrow and empowerment. "Now, David, you have a choice. You can reflect on your actions, recognize the mistakes you've made, and perhaps learn from them. Or you can continue believing that control is love, that manipulation is care. But your choices do not dictate my life anymore. My decisions are my own, and they always will be." He sank into the stool at the island, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his own conscience. I poured a fresh cup of coffee for myself, letting the aroma fill the room, grounding me in this moment of hard, won clarity. Is there any way to fix this? Can we make things right?" I sighed softly, thinking of the years of loyalty, love, and disappointment. David, forgiveness and trust are not interchangeable. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. Forgiveness does not erase the past. What you did has consequences, and it is time you understand them fully. He nodded slowly, the first true recognition of his actions crossing his features. I could see the son I had loved, trapped beneath the veneer of a husband's ambition and a wife's cunning. And yet, despite the betrayal, there was still a bond there, a fragile, delicate bond that could survive only if respect returned. Mom Jessica, she doesn't understand. She thought she was helping. I let out a quiet laugh, soft but edged with steel. Helping? David? No. She thought she could control me, my life, my money. And you allowed it. You let her dictate your actions, your beliefs about me, and your view of our family. That is not helping. That is manipulation. David's eyes flicked to the window, then back to mine. Mom, what about the money? The inheritance, how should we? I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. David, you are not entitled to anything. Nothing. Not a single dollar. Not a piece of property. Not access to my life. You and Jessica made that choice when you assumed I could be controlled and tried to take my rights from me. You will not profit from your mistakes. His jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to negotiate, but the truth I delivered was immovable. I walked over to the French doors leading to the backyard, letting the late afternoon light wash over me, illuminating the peace and beauty I had built in this sanctuary. "I will always love you, David," I said quietly, almost to myself. But love does not mean submission. It does not mean giving someone else power over your life. And it certainly does not mean allowing cruelty and manipulation to dictate your actions. He nodded again, smaller this time, humbled. Before he left, I handed him the porcelain cup he had been gripping. "Take this home," I said softly. "Remember it. Remember this conversation. Let it guide you, not my money. Let it guide you to understanding what true respect and love mean. And perhaps one day, you will see the truth of Lionel's lesson wealth is not measured by dollars, but by clarity, integrity, and the courage to act rightly, even when no one is watching. He turned at the door, paused, and whispered, I understand, Mom. I watched him go, feeling a mixture of relief, sorrow, and triumph. Relief that the confrontation was over, sorrow for the son I had to correct, and triumph because, finally, I had claimed my life, my independence, and my peace. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the crystal chandelier casting soft light across the polished floor, and allowed myself a quiet smile. For the first time in decades, I felt truly free. The days after David left were quiet, almost eerily so. I walked through my home, each room a testament to freedom I had never allowed myself before. The marble countertops gleamed. The art on the walls whispered stories of taste and triumph, and the garden outside was a sanctuary of green and life. I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the breakfast nook, letting sunlight spill across the table. Peace had returned to me, but the thought of David, Jessica, and the children lingered like a shadow at the edge of my mind. I decided to take action, not out of revenge, but out of care for the ones I truly loved, Emma and James. They were innocent in all of this, pawns in the manipulation of adults. I could not allow their affection for me to be used as a weapon, nor could I leave them unprotected financially. Sitting down at my desk, I began drafting plans for a trust fund, a safeguard for their education and future that their parents could not dictate. Each stroke of the pen felt liberating. This was power wielded wisely, and it was mine alone. 2 weeks later, I arranged a meeting with Caroline Hayes, the estate attorney who had been quietly handling my husband Lionel's accounts and my own finances. Caroline was brilliant, precise, and, most importantly, discreet. Viola, she said, I understand you want to establish trust funds for Emma and James, completely controlled outside their parents' hands. I nodded, thinking of their wide-eyed faces, innocent and trusting, deserving of protection. Yes, $1 million for each, to cover college, graduate school, and perhaps their first home. They will have access when they turn 25. No one else, not David, not Jessica. Only them. Caroline smiled approvingly. Perfect. We can structure the trust to ensure their security, completely insulated from any outside influence. This is the most prudent course. I felt a warmth spread through me. This was not about money. This was about ensuring that love and respect, principles absent from their parents' recent actions, were what guided these children's future. The thought of Emma and James walking confidently into adulthood, fully aware of their independence and worth, filled me with purpose. Thank you, Caroline. And I want to do one more thing, I added. I want to send a letter to David and Jessica. They need to understand the consequences of their actions in a way they cannot ignore. Caroline nodded. I can help you word it, but it should be firm, clear, and final. No room for negotiation or excuses. I agreed. The letter was delivered personally to their mailbox, a final gesture of boundary setting. I did not speak to them, did not explain, did not allow another confrontation. The message was simple. You have lost my trust and my openness because of your manipulation. My grandchildren will be provided for, but you will not control it. I would always love Emma and James, but their parents' mistakes were their responsibility. In the meantime, I focused on myself. I began spending time in the garden every morning, planting flowers that reflected the colors of freedom, vibrant reds, hopeful yellows, serene blues. I reconnected with old friends who had been distant during my years of caution, sharing laughter and memories I had long suppressed. I took a pottery class and painted watercolors, hobbies I had never dared indulge in while living under the assumption that my priorities had to be others' expectations. Each moment of creation was a reaffirmation I was alive, capable, and independent. 3 weeks after establishing the trusts, a letter arrived in my mailbox, smaller and carefully folded. It was from Emma. I recognized her neat handwriting immediately. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Dear Grandma Viola, I hope you are happy in your new house. I miss you very much. Mommy says you don't want to see us, but I know that's not true. I love you. Can I visit someday? Love, Emma. A small P.S. followed. James says hi, and he misses your chocolate chip cookies. Tears filled my eyes, but they were different now. Tears of connection and hope, not of frustration or betrayal. That night, I sat in my sunroom, the letter clutched in my hands, feeling the weight of decades of restraint lift. I realized that life would not always be easy, and reconciliation with David and Jessica was not guaranteed. But the children, their hearts were still pure, still mine to nurture in the ways I could control. And that was enough. For the first time, I felt the power of choice, of self-determination. I could be generous, loving, and uncompromising at the same time. As I folded the letter and placed it in my jewelry box, alongside Lionel's wedding ring and my mother's pearls, I knew something profound. Wealth had never been about money alone. It was about freedom, boundaries, and clarity. And now, after years of struggle, manipulation, and doubt, I had finally earned all three. My inheritance was a gift, yes, but more importantly, it was the key to the life I had been denied for far too long. Morning light spilled into my sunroom, painting the walls with a soft golden glow. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the silence, the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim. My phone remained quiet, no calls from David, no pleas from Jessica, no questions about money or inheritance. For the first time in decades, I was free from their control. I stood and walked to the window, watching the garden I had nurtured bloom under the early sun. Birds darted between the hedges, their songs crisp and cheerful. I realized how much I had been missing, how much of life I had observed, but never fully lived because I was trapped in fear, obligation, and pretense. I decided to take a walk in the neighborhood, a small but deliberate act of claiming my independence. I waved to neighbors I had only ever greeted politely in passing. For the first time, I slowed down, noticing the laughter of children in backyards, the rich aroma of fresh coffee from open windows, and the warm smiles that came without expectation. This, I thought, was living for myself, not for David, not for Jessica, not even for my late husband's memory. Though he had provided the means, it was for me, entirely. 2 days later, a small package arrived. I opened it to find a hand-painted ceramic vase, wrapped carefully with a note from Margaret. For your garden, to remind you that you bloom where you plant yourself. I held it close, feeling the love that had been unwavering in my life. Margaret had been my confidante, my sister in spirit, always reminding me of my worth when others sought to diminish it. She had seen through the facade I had maintained for years, and now she saw me fully. A woman liberated, yet grounded, rich not only in money but in strength. As the days went by, my thoughts turned increasingly to Emma and James. I worried about how David and Jessica would attempt to manage their disappointment. Would they turn to anger, resentment, manipulation? Would they attempt to bypass the trust, find loopholes, or even try to turn the children against me? The very thought sent a chill through me. But I knew I had taken precautions. The trusts were airtight, meticulously designed so that the children alone would benefit. No parent, no lawyer, no external influence could change that. The certainty gave me a calm resolve. Late one afternoon, I received a call from Emma's teacher, Janet Martinez. She spoke softly, but I could hear the excitement in her voice. Mrs. Morrison, Emma asked me to call. She's been saving her allowance. She wants to buy you a gift, but she doesn't know your address. My heart lifted. The innocence and thoughtfulness of a child reminded me of everything worth protecting. I gave Janet my address and asked her to allow Emma to send it herself, discreetly, without her parents' interference. I imagined her small hands carefully selecting a card or tiny trinket, each action a message of love untainted by adult schemes. That evening, I sat on the patio, glass of wine in hand, reflecting on the transformation my life had undergone. The home I had once entered quietly, hesitant, fearing judgment and scorn, now pulsed with vitality and intention. Each room spoke of autonomy. Each choice I made, what to eat, where to sit, how to decorate, whom to entertain, was mine alone. I was not just rich in dollars, but in freedom. I realized then that the inheritance had been far more than monetary. It had been a key to understanding my own power and reclaiming the life I had silently yearned for all these years. Days turned into weeks, and letters from Emma and James began arriving more frequently. Each one was a small treasure. They wrote of school, of their favorite games, and of the times they thought of me. Their words carried a weight I had not anticipated, a profound reassurance that love, when genuine, can transcend adult misunderstandings and disputes. I placed each letter carefully in a dedicated box, alongside Lionel's ring, my mother's pearls, and the first photograph I had of Emma in my arms. These tangible reminders of connection and history grounded me. I also began focusing on myself in new ways. I enrolled in a local art class, started swimming laps at a nearby pool, and joined a book club for women my age. Each activity was a declaration. I was no longer bound by past expectations, and I could pursue interests freely, without judgment or interference. The thrill of learning something new, of pushing myself physically and intellectually, rekindled a vitality I had forgotten existed. Evenings were spent hosting small gatherings for close friends, sharing laughter and stories in a home that had become a sanctuary of joy. One late night, while sipping tea under the stars, I reflected on the profound shift that had occurred. I realized that the money, while substantial, had never been the true source of power. It was the confidence to make choices, to set boundaries, and to live unapologetically that had changed everything. I thought of David and Jessica, of their desperation and entitlement. And I felt no anger, only clarity. They had been given the chance to act with respect, kindness, and love, and they had chosen otherwise. My peace was intact because I had acted wisely and with foresight. The next morning, I woke early, the soft sunlight spilling across my bedroom floor. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of birds in the garden. I poured myself a cup of coffee and walked to the balcony overlooking the backyard. My garden was flourishing roses, tulips, and lavender swayed gently in the breeze. I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. It struck me that for years I had been afraid to claim this space, this life, afraid of judgment, of intrusion, of losing control. Now, I stood in it fully, unafraid, untethered. I decided it was time to take a step further, something more deliberate to ensure my independence. I called Caroline Hayes, my trusted attorney, to discuss additional protections for my assets. We spoke at length about setting up advance directives and further legal safeguards, not out of paranoia, but out of prudence. David and Jessica had demonstrated clearly that their intentions were not purely loving, they had prioritized control over family. Caroline reminded me gently, Viola, the most powerful inheritance your husband gave you wasn't the money. It was your clarity, your ability to protect yourself and make decisions that honor your life. Her words resonated deeply. Later that afternoon, I took a walk through the neighborhood, relishing the anonymity and freedom. No one knew who I was. No one was calling, pressuring, or questioning me. I greeted neighbors and received warm smiles in return. It was a different kind of richness, a life of quiet, unjudged existence, where my choices were mine alone. As I walked past a small park, I noticed a group of children playing. Their laughter reminded me again of Emma and James, of the joy that had always existed in their presence, untouched by greed or manipulation. I made a silent promise I would never allow anyone to weaponize that love against me again. Back at home, I decided to focus on creating an environment that reflected who I was, not what others expected me to be. I rearranged furniture, added art I truly loved, and even commissioned a sculpture for the garden, an abstract piece symbolizing freedom and resilience. Each decision, however small, was an assertion of self, a message that I would no longer shrink or hide to appease others. For the first time in decades, I was living authentically, unapologetically, and with a sense of pride that felt almost foreign. A few days later, a small package arrived from Emma. I opened it carefully and found a handmade bracelet with her name engraved on a tiny silver charm. The accompanying note read, "Grandma, I love you and I miss you. I hope we can see each other soon." Tears welled in my eyes. The gesture, simple yet profound, reminded me that love can endure, even when circumstances are difficult, that children can still reach across divides adults create. I tucked the bracelet into my jewelry box beside Lionel's ring and my mother's pearls, a tangible connection to the heart of my life. The following week, I received an unexpected visitor, Margaret, holding a box of old photographs. We sat together on the sunroom couch, flipping through images of my family and childhood, each one a story, a memory. There were pictures of Lionel and me at our wedding, my children as toddlers, holidays with my parents. The images reminded me of everything I had endured and everything I had overcome. I realized that my story wasn't just about betrayal or inheritance. It was about resilience, wisdom, and the ability to create peace from chaos. That evening, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. I detailed the events leading to my current independence, the lessons I had learned about people, money, and self-respect. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to solidify my boundaries and articulate my intentions for the future. I vowed to continue protecting my grandchildren while nurturing their relationship with me, free from manipulation. I also wrote down personal goals, travel plans, courses I wanted to take, and experiences I wished to savor. Each entry was a declaration my life was now mine to design. Later, as dusk settled over the garden, I poured a glass of wine and stepped outside. The colors of sunset reflected in the small fountain I had installed, painting the water with shades of pink and gold. I thought of Lionel and the wisdom he had imparted before his passing. The lessons about wealth, trust, and true character. His guidance had led me here, to a life where I could embrace my autonomy, appreciate beauty, and act with both discernment and love. I realized that I was no longer waiting for permission from anyone to be happy, to be free, to be fully myself. The next morning, I woke to the gentle sound of wind rustling through the trees, carrying the scent of lavender from the garden. I wrapped myself in a soft cashmere shawl and sat at the kitchen island, savoring my coffee as the sunlight spilled across the marble countertops. The house was alive with quiet energy, a stark contrast to the chaos that had filled my life for so long. For the first time, I truly felt the weight of freedom settling over me. Every decision I made now was mine, free from the prying eyes or manipulations of others. It was intoxicating. I decided to begin the day with something I had always wanted to do, but never permitted myself: painting. I had purchased a large canvas weeks earlier and set up a small studio in the sunroom. The smell of fresh acrylics, the blank canvas, the potential, it all felt symbolic of my life right now. I squeezed the paint onto the palette, allowing my hands to move almost instinctively. Colors bled into one another, forming shapes that represented hope, strength, and rebirth. With each stroke, I felt layers of tension dissolve. It was more than art. It was catharsis, a visual testament to the life I was now claiming for myself. As I painted, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was Emma. "Grandma, I finished a drawing! I can't wait to show you when I visit." My heart swelled. Even though her parents had tried to control and manipulate the connection between us, Emma's pure love shone through. I typed back quickly, "I can't wait to see it, sweetheart. You're always welcome here." In that moment, I realized that family could exist outside of toxicity. True bonds were not dictated by greed or control. They thrived on trust, honesty, and care. By midday, I had lost track of time entirely. Margaret arrived, bringing with her a basket of homemade pastries. We sat in the garden, eating and talking about plans for the coming months. I told her about the painting, my new routine, and my thoughts about traveling. Margaret smiled knowingly. "Viola, it's as if you've been given a second chance at life. Don't waste it being cautious. Be bold, live fully." I nodded, understanding the truth in her words. Boldness wasn't just about spending money or acquiring luxuries. It was about embracing my own autonomy, my own voice, and refusing to bow to the whims of those who had betrayed me. That afternoon, I received a call from Caroline Hayes. She had reviewed my updated legal arrangements and confirmed that everything was in order. The grandchildren's trust funds were secure, accessible only to them at the designated ages, and all contingencies were set to protect their interests. I felt a profound sense of relief. Money, once a source of tension and potential conflict, had been transformed into a shield, a tool for empowerment rather than a weapon for manipulation. Caroline reminded me again, "You've done the right thing, Viola. Not just for yourself, but for your family's future." Later, I walked through my home, noticing details I had never paid attention to before. The texture of the silk curtains, the weight of the doors, the way light reflected off the crystal chandelier. Each element symbolized more than wealth. It symbolized independence, control, and dignity. For decades, I had been relegated to the shadows, forced to shrink into myself to accommodate others' expectations. Now, every corner of this house reflected my taste, my choices, and my newfound courage. I realized that creating this environment was not indulgent, it was necessary. It was a statement to the world, and to myself, that I mattered. In the evening, I decided to take a drive, something spontaneous I had rarely done. I drove along winding roads, the setting sun painting the sky in deep oranges and pinks. Music played softly in the background, classical pieces Lionel had loved, and I allowed myself to feel gratitude for everything he had taught me. He had given me more than money. He had given me insight, wisdom, and the understanding that true power lies in discernment, patience, and self-respect. As I navigated the curves of the road, I realized that freedom was not just physical, it was emotional and mental. I could no longer be swayed, coerced, or manipulated. That night I returned home to an empty but comforting silence. I poured a glass of wine and stepped into the garden where the moonlight illuminated the fountain. I thought about David, Jessica, and all the ways they had tried to control me. And yet, for the first time, I did not feel anger. Instead, I felt clarity. Their actions had revealed who they were, and I had responded with wisdom and dignity. I was free not just from their control, but from the need for their approval. The 8 million was more than money. It was a mirror, reflecting my strength and the life I had the right to live. The following morning, I woke to the chirping of birds and the golden light spilling across the sunroom. I poured myself a cup of coffee and looked out at the garden, now bursting with life. Each flower, each perfectly trimmed hedge, felt like a symbol of the new life I had created, one that was mine entirely, free from manipulation or control. The air smelled sweet, and the calmness in my chest reminded me how far I had come. I had survived the scheming, the guilt trips, the constant questioning of my ability to manage my own affairs. And now, for the first time in decades, I could breathe without restraint. As I sipped my coffee, a thought crossed my mind. I had wealth, freedom, and safety, but I also had a responsibility, not to David or Jessica, but to myself and to Emma and James. The trust funds ensured their future, yes, but what about teaching them the values that money could never buy? Love, respect, integrity, resilience. These were lessons I wanted them to carry with them, even before they could access the funds. I decided to start keeping a journal, letters addressed to them, full of stories, guidance, and wisdom that they would one day read. Perhaps it would help them understand the life I had lived, the challenges I had overcome, and the choices that had shaped me. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see a familiar figure, Margaret, carrying a small box tied with a ribbon. "Morning, Viola," she called, smiling. "I thought you might like a little inspiration today." I set down my coffee as she handed me the box. Inside were art supplies, brushes, paints, and a set of blank canvases. "Thought you could use more space to explore your creativity," she said. I laughed softly. "You know me too well, Margaret." I felt a rush of gratitude. For the first time, no one was judging me, no one was limiting me. Every choice I made was mine to enjoy, mine to savor. After Margaret left, I went back inside and set up the new canvases near the sunroom windows. The sunlight illuminated the room perfectly. I decided to tackle a portrait of Emma and James from memory, capturing their joy and innocence. As I painted, I thought about the moment I had first revealed the 8 million inheritance to David. I could still feel the mixture of shock, greed, and eventual resignation in his expression. It had been painful to see my own son act that way, but it was also necessary. He had shown me his true self, and now I could make decisions without fear, without hesitation. By mid-afternoon, I decided to take a walk in the neighborhood. The Henderson grandchildren were playing in their backyard, and I paused to watch their laughter. It reminded me that joy could be found in simple moments, in the sound of children's voices, in the sunlight bouncing off leaves, in the gentle rhythm of life continuing around me. I realized that my focus on money and security, while important, was never the core of happiness. True contentment came from freedom, self-respect, and the ability to connect authentically with others. When I returned home, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Emma's teacher, Janet Martinez. Emma had drawn a picture for me. She wrote, and she wanted me to see it before bringing it over. I felt my heart swell and replied immediately, expressing my excitement and gratitude. The message reminded me that despite David and Jessica's manipulations, the children were still innocent, still capable of genuine love. I would protect that love at all costs, ensuring it wasn't tainted by greed or deception. Evening came, and I prepared a simple dinner, enjoying the process of cooking for myself, for no one else. I set the table with the china I had been hesitant to use, poured a glass of wine, and sat in the quiet, relishing the solitude. The day had been full of reflection, creativity, and small joys, and I realized that this was the life I had always deserved. I didn't need validation from anyone. I didn't need approval or acknowledgement. My life, my choices, my happiness, these were sufficient. Before bed, I wrote the first entry in Emma and James' letters. I told them about courage, honesty, and the importance of standing firm in their beliefs, even when others try to manipulate them. I wrote about resilience and the value of understanding who can be trusted. Most importantly, I assured them of my love, unwavering and unconditional. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a profound sense of peace. The 8 million had given me more than financial freedom. It had given me the chance to discover myself, to live authentically, and to build a life that was entirely, unapologetically mine. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting the living room in warm, golden hues. I stood barefoot on the polished wooden floor, savoring the quiet. No phone calls from David, no guilt-laden messages from Jessica, no threats of conservatorship. Just me, and for the first time in decades, that was enough. I made myself a cup of Ethiopian coffee, the aroma filling the room, and I felt a smile tug at my lips. freedom had a taste, and it was richer than anything money could buy. I had decided that today would be about reconnecting with the world in ways that nourished my soul. I walked into my studio, canvases and brushes waiting, and began a new painting. This one would capture my journey, the betrayal, the awakening, the reclamation of my life. With each stroke, each blend of color, I felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by a sense of purpose. For the first time, my actions were entirely mine. The money wasn't just a safeguard, it was a tool that allowed me to live without compromise. A soft chime at the doorbell pulled me from my work. Curious, I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door to find a small package sitting on the mat. No note, just my name written neatly across the top. I carried it inside and carefully unwrapped it. Inside were a set of rare, first edition books my husband, Lionel, had loved: literature, poetry, and history. I smiled, recognizing his handwriting on the dedication inside each cover. It was as if, even after his passing, he was reminding me to live fully, to embrace knowledge, curiosity, and beauty. By late afternoon, I decided to call Caroline Hayes to review the trust funds again. I wanted to ensure every legal safeguard was in place for Emma and James. As I spoke with her, outlining final adjustments, I felt a sense of control and certainty I had never experienced with David and Jessica involved. No manipulation, no pressure, just the careful planning of a grandmother who refused to let her love for her grandchildren be used against her. When I hung up, I felt a deep satisfaction knowing I had acted decisively, with clarity, and with unwavering integrity. The following day, I drove into town to visit a local charity that supported women who had suffered from familial or financial abuse. I had decided that part of my newfound wealth should be a force for good, a way to protect others who had not yet discovered their strength. Walking through the doors, I was greeted warmly by staff who had heard of my story through a mutual acquaintance. I shared my experiences with them, how I had been undermined, manipulated, and doubted, and I saw the understanding and validation in their eyes. They were not just listening, they were witnessing a woman reclaiming her power. As I returned home that evening, the sun dipping low over my garden, I paused to reflect. The 8 million inheritance had not changed who I was. It had amplified the person I had always been capable of becoming. It had given me the freedom to choose my own path, to surround myself with people who valued me for me, and to protect the innocence and futures of the grandchildren I loved so deeply. I realized then that wealth was not simply about money, it was about autonomy, security, and the ability to act without coercion. Later that night, as I poured a glass of wine and settled into the sunroom, I opened my journal and began writing letters to Emma and James. I wanted them to understand the value of honesty, courage, and discernment. I wanted them to see the importance of protecting themselves while remaining compassionate. I wrote about love, trust, and the reality that sometimes adults make mistakes, but that forgiveness, when paired with boundaries, could protect them rather than hurt them. With each word, I felt my voice grow stronger, my presence in their lives more tangible. As midnight approached, I stepped out onto the patio, the stars stretching endlessly above me. The quiet was intoxicating. I thought about Lionel, about the lessons he had left me, about the challenges I had endured, and about the clarity I had finally found. I was no longer a widow defined by loss or by the scheming of others. I was a woman fully alive, fully in control, and unafraid to live as she chose. I realized, with a smile, that this was not just the life I had rebuilt. It was the life I had always deserved. The next morning, I awoke to a golden glow spilling across the bedroom walls. The sunlight felt like a benediction, warming the room and my heart. I sipped my coffee in the sunroom, listening to the distant chatter of birds and the rustle of leaves. For the first time in years, there was no tension pressing down on me. No fear of judgment, no scheming relatives, no legal threats. Just quiet, just freedom. I smiled and thought of Lionel, imagining him leaning back with a knowing grin, proud that I had learned his lesson about money and human nature. After breakfast, I decided to take a walk through my neighborhood. The streets were calm, the air fresh with early spring. I passed neighbors tending gardens and children riding bikes, their laughter ringing through the air. I waved and smiled, feeling a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I had missed. The world felt vast, open, and forgiving, a stark contrast to the tension and manipulation I had left behind. Each step reminded me of the choices I had made, of the dignity I had reclaimed, and of the life I was now free to design entirely on my terms. As I returned home, a courier knocked at the door. A sleek black envelope with my name in elegant gold lettering was handed to me. Inside was an invitation to an art exhibit featuring a collection of works my husband had admired. It was a subtle, quiet way for him, or the memory of him, to remind me to embrace beauty, intellect, and culture. I felt a pang of nostalgia, but also a surge of joy. Lionel had always encouraged me to cultivate my mind, my taste, and my independence. He had prepared me for this moment in ways I hadn't fully understood until now. Later that afternoon, Caroline Hayes called. Her voice was warm, professional, and reassuring. "Mrs. Morrison, everything is in place for the trust funds. Emma and James' futures are secure, protected, and fully independent. Your instructions were clear, and there's nothing to worry about. The children will have the freedom to use the funds wisely when they reach adulthood." I felt a wave of relief and pride. Not only had I reclaimed my life, but I had also created a safeguard for the people I cared about most. I realized then that true power was not about control over others. It was about foresight, integrity, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. By evening, I sat on the patio with a glass of wine, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. The sky was a symphony of pinks and oranges, reflecting off the windows of my home. I thought about David and Jessica. I wondered if they truly understood what they had lost, not just the money, but the trust, the love, and the respect of someone who had devoted her life to family. I knew, in my heart, that there was no malice in holding them accountable. Setting boundaries was not cruelty, it was self-preservation, and I had spent too long compromising myself for their convenience and comfort. The phone rang, and I hesitated. Caller ID showed an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Hello," a gentle, familiar voice spoke. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Janet Martinez from Cherry Hills Elementary. I'm calling on behalf of Emma." My heart skipped. "Emma, is everything all right?" Janet chuckled softly. "Yes, she's fine. She just wanted to tell you something herself. But her mom wouldn't let her, so she asked me to deliver the message." I held my breath, anticipation mingling with a maternal warmth. Janet continued, reading Emma's words. "Grandma Viola, I miss you. I love you. I hope you are happy in your new home. I am saving my allowance to buy you a present someday. I wish I could visit now, but I will be patient. I love you." My eyes filled with tears. I had feared that my decision to set firm boundaries would hurt my grandchildren. But Emma's message reminded me that love could transcend the interference of others. I felt a deep surge of hope, knowing that one day, when she and James were older, they would understand the wisdom of my choices. After hanging up, I poured myself another glass of wine and settled into my chair, listening to the night sounds of my garden. The chirp of crickets, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of the wind through the trees. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, the loss, the betrayal, the manipulation, and the ultimate triumph of reclaiming my life. I realized that happiness was not just an emotion. It was a state of self-determination, the courage to live authentically, and the wisdom to protect one's heart and mind. As midnight approached, I rose and walked through my home, touching the familiar surfaces, feeling the security of the walls I had chosen, the comfort of the spaces I had created. The inheritance was more than money. It was a key, a tool that allowed me to live fully and fearlessly. I raised my glass to the empty night and whispered a silent toast to Lionel, to myself, and to the future that was mine to shape. The following morning, I awoke to a quiet house, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of birds my only companions. For the first time in decades, there was no one pressing on me, no deadlines, no judgments, no anxious calls from David or Jessica. I dressed in a simple silk blouse and slacks, nothing flashy, yet I felt elegant, complete, and powerful simply by being myself. I poured a cup of coffee and moved to the sunroom, where sunlight poured across the marble floor in warm, golden ribbons. I looked at my garden beyond the glass, thinking about the life I had built and the freedom I had claimed. Every flower, every tree, every perfectly manicured hedge reflected choices I had made, not dictated by anyone else, not manipulated by greed or expectation. It was mine, all mine. After breakfast, I decided to take a stroll through the neighborhood. Children played in the yards, their laughter ringing like silver bells. Neighbors tended gardens and waved, and the scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the cool spring air. For a brief moment, I remembered all the times I had been denied simple joys, prevented from fully participating in life because others assumed I was incapable or too dependent. But now I was walking freely, a woman in control of her destiny, unafraid to be seen, unafraid to claim her happiness. The weight of fear and resentment had lifted. I felt lighter, almost buoyant, as though each step carried me farther away from past injustices and closer to the life I had always deserved. Returning home, a letter was waiting in the mailbox, marked with my name in bold, elegant script. I opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation to a charity gala honoring independent women who had made significant contributions to society. I smiled. Lionel would have loved this. He always admired strong, self-reliant women, and this felt like his subtle approval, a nod from the past that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I set the invitation aside and glanced at the sun-dappled garden. Life was unfolding beautifully, quietly, purposefully. That afternoon, I received another call from Caroline Hayes. Her voice, calm and professional, brought a wave of reassurance. Mrs. Morrison, the trust funds for Emma and James are fully established. They will receive direct access when they turn 25, exactly as you instructed. No one else will have control, and they will be protected against any interference. Your wishes have been implemented precisely. I exhaled, feeling a sense of relief and satisfaction wash over me. The children would be secure, their futures safeguarded, and my responsibility to them fulfilled without compromise or interference from David or Jessica. For the first time, I understood the true power of foresight, patience, and setting firm boundaries. Later, I sat in the kitchen with my wine glass, listening to the subtle hum of the evening and the whisper of the wind through the garden. My thoughts wandered to David and Jessica, wondering if they truly understood the consequences of their actions. I knew now that boundaries were not cruelty. They were the natural result of respect being violated. I had chosen peace, dignity, and self-respect over control, manipulation, and constant conflict. The lessons Lionel had taught me about money, character, and human nature resonated deeply. Wealth was not just currency. It was a lens through which true character revealed itself. And through it, I had seen who loved me and who sought only to take from me. Just as dusk settled over the property, my phone rang. Caller ID showed an unknown number. Cautiously, I answered. "Hello." Janet Martinez, Emma's teacher, spoke gently, her voice tinged with warmth. "Mrs. Morrison, Emma asked me to deliver a message. She's been writing letters, but her mother won't let her send them. She wanted to speak to you." My heart ached and soared simultaneously. "Emma? Is she all right?" Janet read the note slowly. "Grandma Viola, I love you. I miss you. I hope you are happy in your new home. I am saving my allowance to buy you a present. I cannot visit yet, but I will someday. I love you." Tears filled my eyes, unbidden and beautiful. The child's love was pure, unwavering, and untouched by adult conflicts. After the call, I poured another glass of wine and stepped onto the back patio. The garden glowed under the moonlight, silver and ethereal. The path I had chosen, the courage to protect my peace, the wisdom to establish boundaries, the foresight to safeguard my grandchildren, had brought me here. Life felt full, luminous, and profound. I understood now that happiness was not granted by others. It was claimed, nurtured, and defended. I had claimed mine. That night, I placed Lionel's ring and my mother's pearls side by side on the dresser, symbols of love, legacy, and wisdom. The 8 million inheritance had been more than money. It had been the key to freedom, a means to live authentically and generously without compromise. As I lay down to sleep, the wind rustling softly outside, I realized that life's greatest inheritance is clarity, courage, and self-respect. Tomorrow, I would continue to live fully, to love openly, and to embrace every opportunity. For now, though, I slept with peace in my heart, knowing I had emerged whole, resilient, and free. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting golden patterns across the hardwood floors. I dressed in a flowing silk dress, soft and comfortable, yet elegant enough to remind me that I finally had the right to enjoy beauty on my own terms. I moved to the kitchen, brewed a cup of coffee, and took it outside to the patio. The garden was alive with the gentle hum of bees and the scent of blooming roses. I breathed it all in, the air, the silence, the space that was mine, and I realized, once again, how profoundly free I had become. No one could touch this peace. No one could question my decisions, and no one could take away what I had earned, learned, and protected. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about Emma and James. My grandchildren, innocent and bright, were the living proof that love endures despite human folly. I smiled, remembering Emma's letters and her small attempts to reach me. They were reminders of hope, of trust that would one day grow into understanding. I decided to write back, a simple note expressing love, reassurance, and encouragement. It was the first time I had written to them without fear, without compromise, without worrying about how David or Jessica would interpret my words. The act itself felt revolutionary, like reclaiming a part of my soul that had been suppressed for far too long. By mid-morning, I was ready to leave the house, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I dressed in casual attire, comfortable shoes, and a wide, brimmed hat, and stepped into my car. Driving through the tree-lined streets, I felt exhilarated by the sheer joy of autonomy. I could go wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted, unburdened by anyone's expectations or judgments. My mind wandered to the life Lionel had envisioned for me, the independence he had always trusted I could achieve, and I felt a surge of gratitude. He had left me far more than money. He had left me the freedom to discover my own strength. By afternoon, I arrived at a local community center, volunteering to help with a literacy program for underprivileged children. The laughter, curiosity, and raw eagerness of the kids reminded me of Emma and James. Their eyes lit up with the discovery of new words, new ideas, new possibilities. I realized that my wealth, though substantial, was not the true measure of my legacy. My ability to touch lives, to inspire, to nurture, and to create hope, that was my greatest gift. I spent hours with the children, reading stories, answering questions, and witnessing the spark of understanding ignite in their minds. It was fulfilling in a way that no sum of money ever could be. Later, back at home, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the garden. I poured a glass of wine and walked among the flowers, feeling the soft petals brush against my fingers. The serenity of the evening wrapped around me like a blanket. I thought about David and Jessica one last time, not with anger, but with clear recognition of their limitations. They had taught me a valuable lesson: love and family cannot be coerced, manipulated, or forced. Respect and trust must be freely given, and if they are not, stepping away is not cruelty, it is preservation of self. That night, I stood under the stars, the garden glowing in the soft moonlight. I raised my glass silently to Lionel, to my parents, to Emma and James, and to the life I had claimed. I had finally understood that freedom is the ultimate inheritance, and it is worth far more than gold or jewels. I danced quietly to music only I could hear, the wind carrying the melodies through the trees. My laughter, soft and genuine, mingled with the night air. I was wholly alive, entirely myself, and completely unafraid. As I went inside, placing Lionel's ring and my mother's pearls back on the dresser, I felt a deep sense of closure. The inheritance had secured my freedom, yes, but the lessons of patience, discernment, and self-respect were priceless. I had proven to myself that I could rise above manipulation, greed, and fear. I had protected those I loved and set boundaries that ensured peace. My future was mine to shape, with every choice reflecting my values, strength, and wisdom. Before bed, I opened a journal, writing down thoughts, reflections, and dreams. For the first time, I wrote without caution, without hiding, without doubt. I wrote of hope, love, and courage, of the power of truth, of the beauty in living authentically. I knew there might still be challenges ahead, but I also knew I had everything I needed within me to meet them. I could navigate life on my terms, fully capable, fully worthy, fully free. Lying down, I closed my eyes with gratitude swelling in my chest. The sun would rise tomorrow, as it always does, and I would greet it with open arms, open heart, and unwavering confidence. I was Viola Morrison widow, grandmother survivor, and woman of unshakable strength. And now, at last I was home, in my life, in my peace, and in my truth. The story was over, but my life had truly begun.